All right, welcome to everybody who's joining. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can keep on time and be sure Dr. Brown gets as much time as allotted this afternoon. So I have a few slides just to welcome everyone. For those who might be joining for the first time, we're excited to host another virtual quarterly session. If you've not been involved with SPOT, we are the simulation professionals of Texas, and our goal is really to provide education, collaboration, and networking opportunities for anybody involved in simulation, whether you're an educator, an ops specialist, administrator, standardized patient, you name it. We also have some key people that are on the call, and I'm hoping that maybe somebody from our advisory board is joining us. They help give us direction on the way SPOT is moving. And then we have our planning and oversight committee, and you can see a few of them on this afternoon as well. We have Miss Erica. Erica, I don't know if you want to wave. Great. And then we also have Ruben joining us, and I'm not sure Brian's able to join. And for those who don't know, my name is Crystal Campbell. So very excited, everybody, for joining our meeting this afternoon. So where are we going with SPOT? So this is your first meeting. We've done a lot of work to really get established as a 503C, and we are excited to announce we have received our 503 status. We're just waiting on some of our paperwork to finalize and be processed. We also have been promoting a GoFundMe page. The GoFundMe page, we're really excited, has raised our full goal of $1,000, and that money is going to be used for helping us process the rest of our 503C paperwork. So thank you so much for those who donated. So how do you keep in touch with SPOT? We get this question a lot. Erica does an amazing job, as well as Jeremiah, on just keeping people up to date. We try to host these events quarterly. If you're not on our listserv and getting the announcements of upcoming events, I really encourage you to take a screenshot of this screen and go ahead and email us after. We'll get you on the listserv. If it's easier, you can also visit us on our website. Our website is listed on your screen as well, or join in on our Facebook page. We also record all of our presentations. So today's presentation is being recorded, and Erica will be helping get that uploaded to YouTube. And then she'll also send out an announcement to our listserv that that recording is live. So with that, I'm really excited. Some of you got the email, but we are very honored to have Dr. Brown with us today. Dr. Brown is an associate professor at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and she is the fearless leader of the Masters of Simulation program there. She's also the recipient of many prestigious awards, including the President's Award for Effective Teaching. And she's here to talk to us today about debriefing. Specifically, you've got this, practical tips for effective debriefing. And in a moment, I'm going to go ahead and actually stop sharing just to switch my slide deck over to her slides. Give me one minute. And we'll go ahead and begin sharing again. And hopefully I can see some head nods that everybody can see her slide deck. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Sure. So I think we have about 45 minutes together. And I want to make sure I'm going to do my best to end early because I want to make sure there's time for questions, because this is really about you guys and what you need. And so I'm going to present some information, and I hope it resonates with you and generates lots of questions and curiosities. And number one, this is for you, but number two, also, I want to make sure to provide resources. And so I have my contact information down here, my email, and then my Twitter handle, because Twitter is so pervasive in the simulation community. And then we have the master's program there too. And so if there's ever 6 months down the road, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're thinking about how you're going to do something, and you go, you know what, that woman that SPOT had talk, sometime over the summer, said something and I can't remember what that was. Please reach out to me. I want to help you no matter where you are and what you're doing. So if I can help, please let me know. And Crystal is changing the slides. So every once in a while I may say, hey, next slide. So just a quick roadmap for today. We're going to look at resources, like I just said. I want to talk about how genuine curiosity can facilitate reflection. We were just talking, I even have stickers like on my water bottle or on my laptop or whatever. Just be curious, just live life being curious is so much better. And then bringing that into debriefing is really just a good use of your time with your learners. And then we're going to look at how we can use frameworks. And while frameworks provide structure, if you use them, they can actually provide flexibility and kind of an ease to a debriefing. And so even though it brings structure, to me, it brings flexibility. And so I'm hoping I can convey that this afternoon. And so just to make sure we're all on the same page, because I've been leading the master's program for the last 5 years, not everybody pre-briefs. And so I want to make sure, as we're having our conversation, that we think of simulation as pre-briefing, simulation, debriefing, especially for the most part, we're talking about immersive simulation today. Debriefing, procedural simulation has the same components, but in a different order. So talking about immersive simulation and just that pre-briefing to emphasize, if you don't do a good pre-briefing, it's greatly going to impact your debriefing. A pre-briefing can completely change a simulation and a debrief and really a program. When you're genuinely conveying that you want their participation. You want this to be a space where people can make mistakes. I always use the word mistake when I pre-brief. This is the place for that. It sets the tone for this is a learning space. This isn't, there are, absolutely summative assessments in debriefing, in simulation, but really conveying that we're learning here and just setting the tone, hopefully working toward establishing some psychological safety. Then we have the simulation. That good pre-brief is going to bring that safety into the simulation and then hopefully bring that safety into the debriefing. And I hope we can all agree to never use the phrase, this is a safe space, because you can't determine that for someone else. You can do your best to work to create a safe space. And so pre-brief, simulation, debrief. And just resources. Hopefully you guys are all familiar with the healthcare simulation standards of best practice. And Axel just published an update this time last year, right around September. So they've been updated. They were written by interprofessional and an international group of healthcare workers. And so they're really for everyone in simulation, not just nurses. Just because it's published and led by an Axel does not mean it's exclusively for nurses. And so we're going to talk about debriefing in that it's a planned experience. It's facilitated by a trained debriefer. It's important that we understand how debriefing should look. And so you guys are here. And so you're working on that training already. We want to make sure that we're promoting reflection and exploration and working toward that psychologically safe environment. And then we want it grounded in a theoretical framework. And that's just the 4 criteria that are part of the debriefing standard. So why do we debrief? We want to promote learners' reflection on performance. We want to know why they did something. We want them to think about what they did. We don't necessarily want them coming into debriefing saying, oh, what's Michelle going to point out that I did wrong today? Okay, we want to promote reflection. We as debriefers, we're in debriefing because we want to understand learners' actions, why they chose to do what they did. Not do they know how, but why they chose to make those decisions or why they took that approach. Then in debriefing, once we've started some reflection and understanding their actions, we want to tie this to the real world and say, okay, so next time you're seeing a patient with this diagnosis in this particular situation, what are some things that you might do? And so making connections to the real world so that we can improve future performance during similar situations. So frameworks, I would love it if we could put in the chat, if you guys could let me know which frameworks you use for debriefing. It could be that you're new to debriefing and you go, I have no idea what Michelle's talking about. But this could be GAS, SHARP, Advocacy inquiry is part of the understanding phase. Pearls, I see. Yeah, plus delta is part of many debriefing models, but especially emphasized in pearls. Some plus delta. I was doing a talk for folks largely in the UK, and they use something called SHARP, and that was one that I was not familiar with. And then a couple of months later, I was in Qatar, and they don't use any frameworks. Debriefing for meaningful learning. Good. Okay, so a variety of frameworks. The framework I'm going to emphasize over the next 30 minutes or so that we're together is Pearls. And it brings in advocacy inquiry. It brings in plus delta. It gives you the flexibility to use what your learners need. So we'll go to the next slide. So Pearls, I want to give all the credit to Walter Epic and Adam Chang. I'm sharing this just because Pearls is what we use in our simulation center, because it provides what the flexibility for whatever the debriefer is comfortable with, for whatever is going to help the learners the most. If you have, first semester nursing students, if you have 25-year professionals who have seen it all and practice, Pearls can work no matter what your situation is. So that's what I'll be discussing over the next 30 minutes. So let's look at Pearls, setting the scene, and we're going to break down each of these, talking about the environment that might work well. And then we're going to go through reactions, descriptions, analysis, and then application and summary. And so we'll go through each of these in detail. Just a preview slide. In just a minute, I'm going to talk about previewing, and it's important to preview. So setting the scene, I have this picture here. Hopefully all of you guys already debrief kind of in this circle. It kind of limits a power dynamic. If I'm standing up at the front of the room and my learners are sitting kind of classroom style, that's still the sage on the stage. They're waiting for me to tell them, like as an expert in the room, to tell them what should have happened, how they should have done things. And so, using the circle kind of creates a dynamic where we're all here together and let's have a conversation, making sure it's comfortable. We want to, as much as we can, leave the simulation room and debrief in a different space, because if we're still in the room, our learners might be looking around like, oh, I struggled with that IV pump. And so then they're just looking and they're distracted over here, or I can't believe there's that much blood on the floor, or whatever it might be. Let's remove them from that. And so we're now transitioning to a conversation. And so hopefully we're debriefing in another room. You're going to state the goal of debriefing. A lot of times I'll say, for this debriefing, I may put some questions out there, but this is really about what you are willing to share with the group. And I want to hear from you guys. I'm hoping you guys do more than 50% of the talking, but sharing that, we want them to reflect. If you had observers, sharing that you want the observers to participate in simulation as well. So just letting them know, like, what is this going to look like? And then share that, hey, we have the next 30 minutes together, or, if it's an in situ, we're going to spend the next 4 minutes unpacking what just happened, because in situ debriefing is much shorter in general, because everybody needs to get back to practice. But just putting some boundaries up there, and then putting the expectations out there so they know what they're getting into. Then we move to reactions. This is multi-pronged. It allows your participants to just, you guys have been in debriefing. Sometimes your learners sit back and just take a big exhale. And so it just lets them unwind. You may have heard of the phrase emotion before cognition. Sometimes they just, if they were in a super heightened state of awareness, or they're really frustrated, or they're, oh my gosh, it was so exciting. That was the worst code I've ever seen. And we did it. We worked better as a team than we ever have. We've got to bring those emotions down before we can start to process what was going on. And that's what that phrase emotion before cognition means. It's also very important for us to get a feeling of how our learners are doing. So we may have just watched the simulation and we're going, ooh, that was tough. I expected them to, be able to process that information, and treat that patient with more, differently. but then they come in and they go, yeah, that was great. Oh yeah, we did a really, and so it gets a sense if there's some dissonance between how I'm feeling as the observer and what they're experiencing. It also gives me a chance to say, ooh, my learners really seem upset, because that might be a different kind of debriefing. I might unpack it a different way than if they're feeling that they did a really strong, really good job in sim. And so it's important for me. The whole point in simulation is you need to do what your learners need. And so if you can start by establishing an environment where they can sit, they can take a big exhale, they can unwind, they can reflect, and then starting the conversation with understanding where they are emotionally is key. It's also an opportunity to determine what the learners would like to discuss. So oftentimes in debriefing, we have, I'm just going to make this up, we have two objectives, something about teamwork and communication and something about the clinical skills that we were expecting to see, something like that. And so we're going to unpack those two objectives, but then something happened in there that these learners are unsure about. They weren't sure how to approach this problem, and it might come out there. It might just all pour out, and you might see a bunch of your learners nodding their head like they had no idea what that was. Then you need to talk about it. And so it's also an opportunity to say, oh, okay, let me make a note. And we're going to talk about debriefing scripts in a little bit. Let me write down and make this note that we need to talk about this too. And so you might use some phrasing as you're talking about eliciting reactions. You might say, okay, after caring for Mr. Smith, how are you feeling? Or sometimes we often get, okay, we don't get much information. And so sometimes I will bring them back into the room and I'll say, when you were in the room with Mr. Smith, what did that feel like? And so there's a balance between, if your learners all say, okay, that might be all the information you need to know. They were okay. So we're not too frustrated. We're not too excited. We're somewhere in the middle, but it could be, maybe you feel like your learners are like getting out of unpacking how they really feel by just saying, okay, like blowing it off. So put them back in the room, and that can help sometimes. And then we have descriptions. And so this is an opportunity for, there are two different approaches you could kind of take. We can share the basics, the facts. So this was a 47-year-old who lost consciousness, rapidly deteriorated in the ER. He was in PEA arrest, resuscitated, and was taken to the ICU. Just to give everybody, make sure everybody has the same understanding of the patient's diagnosis and how it went. Couple of sentences, super fast. So they're not wondering, was it PEA or was it something else? We just state it was PEA. We might do that as the debriefer. Or if you take a more learner-centered approach, you could ask your students to share. And I think it kind of depends on how much time you have in debriefing. If it needs to be the 20-second summary, I might share it. If we have time to really unpack, I'll let the learners share it. And so previewing, it is my wholehearted thought that you cannot preview enough just to keep everybody on the same topic. So that it also creates an environment where they know what they're getting into. They know what the topics are going to be. And so just keeping everybody on the same page. So we're going to talk about such and such teamwork and communication, and we're going to talk about something with skills. And they're like, okay. And then you say, I want to start with our teamwork and communication objective, and you're going to state it. And so they know what's coming, but I brought everybody back in and said, okay, we're going to start with working as a team. And so then they are thinking, we're going to work as a team. Okay. Okay, so I want you guys to practice this. I'm surprised. I'm fortunate to be able to teach debriefing pretty frequently. I'm surprised how challenging it can be to create a preview statement. So what I would like for you to do, I have 2 learning objectives up here. Okay, so please put yourself in a space and kind of buy into my simulation here, I guess, and say, okay, you have just watched a simulation whose objectives were utilize closed loop communication with an interprofessional team, and 2, care for a patient experiencing a hemolytic transfusion reaction after 2 units of red cells. And so we're pretending you have just walked through, you've set the stage, you're in this fantastic room, you're in a circle, you're sitting with your learners, not standing. You've gathered reactions and your students are feeling okay about this. You've given them a description and now you're previewing into the understanding phase. And so I would love for you to write probably one sentence. Take this as your learning objectives. These are the two things you're going to talk about, and write a preview statement. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to do that. Okay. So my preview statement might be something like this. Thank you guys for sharing, kind of what you were experiencing in the simulation with me. We had this patient who was a 23-year-old who was a GI bleed, and she received 2 units of red cells. So as we move into this next phase, I want to talk about 2 topics, and I often use my hands, 2 topics. I want to talk about how we use closed loop communication, and I want to talk about hemolytic transfusion reactions. And so I just previewed, we're going to talk about 2 things, closed loop communication and hemolytic transfusion reactions. And so they know what's coming up. And so they're not saying, oh, it's not the patient's blood pressure, or like they're not thinking we're going to talk about something else. So super quick preview. And then what I want to do, Crystal, I think I have another practice and I think we're just going to skip it. Yeah, same thing. All right. And so preview throughout your debriefing. Okay. Hopefully you don't have more than 2 or 3 objectives. If you do, email me. Let's talk about it. I can share that maybe that's not the best practice, but have 2 or 3 objectives and preview. You might even close it out saying, thank you for that conversation on closed loop communication. We've talked about how that can improve communication on an interprofessional team. Now I'd like to switch topics and talk about hemolytic transfusion reactions. So I previewed in the beginning that we're going to talk about closed loop communication, hemolytic transfusion reactions. Then I said, let's start with closed loop communication. Then I asked, maybe I plus delta, maybe I AI, close that up. I'm going to preview again. Thank you for that conversation. Now I'd like to switch to discussing hemolytic transfusion reactions. You can't preview too much, okay? Like I said, close one topic, begin the next, and it keeps everybody on the same page. And sometimes you ask permission. Sometimes I'll say, does anybody else have anything they want to share about closed loop communication or any questions? So we can make sure that that's wrapped up and then they're kind of mentally and emotionally ready to move on to hemolytic transfusion reactions. Okay. Yeah, we don't have to do questions. So we have gone through setting the scene, reactions, description. We're into this analysis and understanding phase. We're already talking about previewing. Now it's kind of the meat of the simulation. This is where we're getting them to reflect. And so we can use plus delta. That's one of the ways that we can have the learners kind of self-assess and tell us what they think went well and what they might do differently next time. We can coach. So that means there is room for teaching. There's a little bit of room for teaching in debriefing. And so part of this talk is I kind of want you guys, if you tend to maybe freeze up a little bit at this stage, like trying to craft the perfect AI. That's crafting the perfect AI is not advocacy inquiry statement, excuse me, is not the goal. The goal is to have a good conversation in which you help the learners reflect. And so if that's not crafting a perfect AI because that stresses you out, then that's not what you're going to do. Hopefully you're going to work toward that. So there's room for plus delta. There's room for a little bit of teaching because if you just keep asking questions when all you need to do is teach, they turn into what we're going to call guess what I'm thinking questions. Okay, so sometimes there's room for coaching. And then we're going to talk about advocacy inquiry. So analysis understanding. This is where we want to understand the learner's frames. I think, how many people do we have on here? 51. There are 51 people that have heard during analysis, you need to understand the learner's frames. But how you do that is whatever you and your learners need. There is not a universal way to approach this. And so there are times where I'm teaching folks in debriefing and they're like, oh, but I've been to such and such a course, or, I learned from so-and-so, AI is the best. AI is fantastic. I'm not denying that at all. AI can really promote solid reflection. But if you're not comfortable using it, then it is not going to promote reflection in your learners. It's going to be an awkward conversation in which nobody shares. Okay, so we want to understand the learner's frames and how you get there, how you're curious and how you convey your curiosity is going to be dependent upon how much time you have. It's going to be dependent on your comfort level. It's going to be sometimes what level of learner. I tend to use a little bit more plus delta, especially with like first semester nursing students or first semester students. And a lot more diving in AI deep stuff with folks who are out in practice. We have to avoid assumptions. You don't know why they did that. Don't assume you know why they did that. And so then we need to identify that performance gap, and only the learner can tell you what the performance gap is. And then we work to close those gaps. And so you're going to have a preview. And then this is part of why I love Pearls so much. Then how I explore it is up to me, and I can use any of these three. And so we're going to go through these three individually. We're going to start with plus delta. And this is where you might ask what went well, and then you let them share. And then you kind of close that, and you move on to what might you do differently next time. Oftentimes when I'm doing plus delta, I use a whiteboard. And that's also, I use a whiteboard because, and I'm going to lean over my shoulder as if I have a whiteboard here. There's just something, I don't use plus delta very often. I use it more with novice learners, but it can promote discussion when folks are new to simulation or new to debriefing. They can see these topics and they're like, oh yeah. And when we were talking about starting the IV, yeah, I had this question too. And I was confused about, I can't believe I forgot to take off the tourniquet. And so sometimes I might circle it, or I put some dots next to it. And like, if we've talked about it a lot, maybe that's something we explore a little bit more, but I'm kind of giving this visual for myself so that I can keep up with, kind of all the things that the learners are sharing. But then also the learners can see that too. And sometimes I'll have a learner do the writing. And that way we're just all participating. And you can do what's called a single barreled question or a double barreled question. So single barreled is, I'd love to start with what went well. And so it's just what went well. You can do, I do not prefer it, but you can do a double barreled question. So I'd like to talk about what went well and what you might do differently next time. And so you can do both at the same time. But I like to unpack what went well first. Learners will often find it easier to unpack what they didn't do well. And so we'll start with what they did well first. So we'll use this when you don't have much time, often when you have novice learners, or if you're a novice debriefer and AIs are just hard, or circular questions is something you can use in debriefing as well, a much more advanced technique. But if you're not there, you can use a plus delta and have effective reflection when you're a new debriefer. And then you can also use it to identify topics for discussion. If there's something that I've circled or put my dots next to over and over, let's unpack that a little bit more. And then we have advocacy inquiry. And so advocacy will be my perspective. I noticed that, and then your judgment. And we're going to have some exploration of that on the next few slides, but you're going to say specifically what you noticed, what you actually saw, because if you did not see it, you are making an assumption. So what you actually saw, I saw you do X, and I want you to remember too, you can debrief excellent performance. So it's not always what they did wrong. And mixing that in is very good for your learners, because then they're not always anticipating that debriefing is going to be a list of all the stuff that I didn't do well. And so it could be, I noticed that you did X really well. And I think that's hard because it was a super stressful situation. Tell me what was going on for you then. Like, how did you do that right? How did you do that well? Okay, so you had my observation. I noticed that you did X very well. My judgment, I think that was probably challenging because there was a lot of chaos in the room. And then my inquiry, a super open-ended question. Tell me what was going on for you at the time. Okay. And so it can just be, I have often when I have teaching new debriefers, I have a sheet of paper that says, I saw, I think, I wonder. And they have to state what they saw. They have to state what they think about it. And then they have to state an open-ended question. So you can use, I saw, I think, I wonder. So here's another one in a clinical situation. Michael, I noticed that your chest compressions were slow. I'm concerned because compression should be 100 to 120 per minute to adequately perfuse the organs. I'm curious what was going on for you at the time. And let me, this is an example to just show you, I have to ask Michael why his compressions were slow. Because it could be, because I don't know. Only he can tell me why they were slow. Depending on what he tells me, he could tell me, oh, I thought it was 80 to 100 beats a minute. I didn't realize it was 100 to 120. It could be that he tells me, yeah, I was really tired, but I wasn't sure who was going to take over compressions. And so I just kept going. And so those are two different conversations. One of them is going to end in a coaching situation. Yep, it's 100 to 120 compressions a minute to adequately perfuse. Okay, and so next time we'll just make it a little bit faster. Might remind him about Baby Shark or whatever you use. So because I asked him, I knew it was because he didn't have the information. Or if he gave me the other example, if he told me I didn't know who was taking over compressions, that's a whole different conversation. That's a conversation on when we're in a code situation, how do we change compressors? Or how do we speak up when we're tired and we're not sure who the next compressor is? Those are, you see how those are two really different conversations? And I have no idea which conversation we need to have. Michael has to tell me which conversation we need to have. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, and so always state what you saw from your perspective. It sounds less accusatory. So you might say, I wasn't able to tell who was the team leader versus you didn't have a team leader. That's an assumption. I couldn't see who the team leader was, but maybe they were. It was a chaotic situation. And the video capture we had, I couldn't see who was at the foot of the bed. Okay. And then another example, there was a lot going on in the room. I wasn't able to hear if anyone identified that the blood pressure was dropping versus you didn't notice the blood pressure was falling. Okay. So not so accusatory, just state what you saw, or I may have missed it, but I didn't see who the team leader was. Like completely own whatever fault there might be there. Oh, dirty questions. I hear a lot of dirty questions, especially at UAB. We're fortunate enough to co-debrief almost all of our simulations, immersive simulations. And so we often have a debriefing expert who may not have the content expertise versus the content expert who doesn't really have the debriefing expertise. And so I often find that our content experts are just kind of quizzing. Do you feel you'll handle the team as well as you could have? Because that's like a, Dr. So-and-so doesn't think I handled the team very well. So what am I going to say here? Do you think you took too long to give the medication? Ooh. Or did that go well? You have no idea how I feel. And now they are scared to death. And so, oh, at the top of the slide, I have GWIT is guess what I'm thinking. And so even if I'm not the content expert, so my clinical background is in medical laboratory science, especially in the blood bank. So we often don't do sims with people with my clinical background. And so I'm usually brought into debriefing as the debriefing expert, and I work with my content expert. And it's important that we're not, either way, whether we're the debriefer or whether we're the content expert, we're an authority figure in the room. And so it is important that we kind of maintain humility. We're curious, and we don't use some of these dirty questions or these quits because they're just trying to please us. And we need to break that barrier at all. I was in a conversation yesterday where we were talking about intellectual candor. There was a paper that came out probably almost maybe a year or two now, where in debriefing, or in many instances, but in debriefing, I'm an expert, but me showing vulnerability and humility goes a long way to opening up reflection and conversation with the learners. But that's hard when you have the content expert in there. That's hard when they come in and they're the director of such and such critical care program. They're the absolute authority. But showing that vulnerability can be really powerful. So I really encourage you guys to do that. Okay, and then just thinking about your language, and this is all part of just keeping that conversation going, doing what's comfortable for you, using inclusive language, like we and us versus you didn't have a leader. I'm wondering if it would be helpful if we all had an understanding of who was the leader in the room. And so using that we and us language rather than you and I, having eye contact and kind of active listening skills, and then scanning the room after an inquiry. And so not only scanning the room so that your eyes are across all of your learners, but it also gives them time to think. And so we all have a silence quotient. Some people are okay with silence, and some people are like, oh, I got to fill the silence. I got to ask the next question, or I have to answer my own question. Scanning and just kind of nodding gives that space for them to reflect. If you are asking them to reflect, you need to give them space and time to do that. Remember, you've just hopefully pinpointed an observation, a point in time, and now they're thinking. And so their brains are going a million miles an hour. What was going on then? How did I make that decision? Oh yeah, so-and-so was standing to my left. I wasn't sure if they had given the epinephrine. It's going. Give them some time to reflect, and then consider your body language. Lean in. Make eye contact, smile, nod your head, engage in conversation. I have seen some of the most brilliant and friendly people, all of a sudden, when they get into debriefing, it's very serious. And I don't know what happens. I think it's because they kind of forget this is a conversation. This isn't some structured something that you need to be nervous about. It's a conversation. And so then our applications and takeaways. And so you might use wording like, okay, as we wrap up our session, I'd like for you to share one thing you can apply to clinical practice, or our time is coming to a close and we've really had great conversation. I'd love to know some of your takeaways. And again, give them time. You're asking them to reflect again. Give them time to reflect. And so I personally do not go one by one. I do not make everybody give a takeaway, because some people may not have a takeaway. They might be reflecting on this experience 3 weeks down the road, and that's when they get their takeaway. You also, you can get takeaways from your learners. And if you have one thing that you're really hoping they take away, but for some reason they didn't mention it, you can share that too. I think it's a little bit of everything. I'm hoping through this conversation, we can all say, oh, okay, I don't have to do it one way. It's a conversation. You share what you and your learners need. And so I have be a cognitive detective, take a stance of curiosity. I have my water bottle, be curious. and we want to reframe cognitively, and we cannot do that unless we have them reflect on why they did what they did. And so if you'll advance, I have a little bit of animation, Crystal. Be curious about the why. When we're curious about the why, and let's say not about the how, when we start thinking about the how, that's when we get these quits and these dirty questions. Okay, but why did they do something? And so I have a colleague, a debriefing friend of mine, he always, as he walks into the room, and I've seen him kind of mouth this, he says, be curious to himself. And so, yeah. So I have a video here. It is in German, but there are, what are those called? Subtitles underneath. And really what they're saying doesn't even really matter. I can tell you what's going to happen in the video. It's about 30 seconds. The woman who's here in the front with the blonde hair, she gave her father an iPad for his birthday. And he's using the iPad in a way that she did not expect. And so what I want you to do is watch this video, and in a second, you're going to write down what you're curious about. Because we've talked about our understanding phase can be based on our objectives. So we already had our communication objective and our clinical objective, but then we might add these other things that our learners needed to talk about, or we might need to add something that when we were watching the simulation, we went, what? Why did they do that? If I furrow my brow during a sim, that's probably something I need to be curious about. If I'm like, what? I need to be curious. And so when you watch this 30-second video, I want you to write down what you're curious about. What makes you furrow your brow? Okay. Okay. So what were you curious about there? That was an expensive cutting board. And so if we'll go to the next slide, I'd like to be on the next slide while we're giving you this. Yeah. So answer that first question. And I want you to answer the second question. What did you actually see? The point of starting with that specific observation is so that in all the chaos that the learners had in their simulation, you can help them focus on one area. And this is exactly what you observed. And then you're going to, let's go to the third question. You're going to insert your judgment here. This is, I didn't really introduce it, but friends at the Center for Medical Simulation, especially Jenny Rudolph, they talk about debriefing with good judgment and why inserting your judgment is important. It's not a debriefing framework. It's more of like a philosophy that you can bring to any debriefing framework. And so it's important to let your learners know how you felt about it. So they're not wondering, oh, she's the content expert. Did she think that was bad? So let them know what you think about it. So far, I hope you have what you were curious about, specifically what you observed, and then what your assessment of that is. And then that fourth bullet, I want you to think of a super open-ended question. So not even something like, so why did you put the iPad in the dishwasher? Nope, that's too specific. It's going to be something like, tell me what was going on for you, or what was on your mind. Super open-ended. I saw, I think, I wonder. About 15 more seconds. And if this were a workshop, we would spend the next 30 minutes unpacking your AIs because that's probably my favorite part of debriefing. Let's all share. Let's all grow together. Let's all talk about what do we think? What might we change? But with this virtual format, hopefully this resource that I saw, I think I wonder, and then kind of working through what what made your brow furrow? What are you curious about? Specifically, what did you observe? What's your assessment? What are your thoughts on that situation? And then a super, super, super open-ended question. Hopefully this is kind of a resource you take with you, and we can chat afterward, or you can email me. I should give you my cell number, call, tweet, whatever it is. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so finishing up with resources. This is I have like up at the top, script it. I'm curious if you guys would just put in the chat, maybe yes, who uses debriefing scripts? I've been debriefing a lot of years and I debrief every week. I use a debriefing script for every sim. Okay. Okay, we got 3, 4. Okay, so then there's an opportunity for the other 50 of you to think about using scripts. Okay. So this is actually what we would call a debriefing guide. This was one, it's from Cornell Medicine in Qatar. I did a couple of day workshop out there for them in May. And like I said, they didn't debrief too much. The universities, Cornell does. And that's why they brought us in. They were hosting a workshop for a lot of area folks in the hospital and different universities around Doha. And a lot of folks didn't use it. And so we created this to show them this is something you could think through. And so this is a guide, what we would call a debriefing guide. It has all the details of each of the sections that we just talked about. And so it's a 1-page summary. Maybe you can print it and keep it. Like I have a clipboard I bring into my debriefings, and I just put my new debriefing script on there. It's called my debriefing clipboard. And so if you're newer to debriefing, you might create something like this, print something like this, and put it on your clipboard and go, oh yeah, what comes next? And why do I do that? What's my goal of that? Oh, look, Crystal has a debriefing clipboard too. And so this can almost be your cheat sheet to remember why you do it. And so this, or you can give this to a content expert who maybe doesn't debrief very often, but we want to remind them, hey, you know what? I just wanted to touch base. Maybe we're co-debriefing and I wanted to touch base before we go into debrief or before the simulation, and emphasize that, you know, we're going to sit in that reactions phase a little bit because I really want to make sure we understand where the learners are before we move on. And so it's also just kind of this tangible thing we can have in front of us if we're going to have a conversation, maybe with a co-debriefer. And then the next slide, we've taken this and it's blank. And so maybe you have your cheat sheet, the last slide that we had, that has the whys and some of the hows. But then maybe on top, this is specific for this particular hemolytic transfusion reaction simulation. And so the facts of the case, you've already typed in. Okay, the reactions, you may use the wording that you want. I love this blank one because I think we all do. Like we all have certain phrasing. There's a way I elicit reactions. I always say, thank you guys for helping care for that patient. I would love to start with, when you were in the room with the patient, how were you feeling? That's almost always, I mean, unless something has gone really wrong and we're not going to do a typical debriefing. And so those are my words. So I can put my words in there. And if I'm new to debriefing, I can look down at my clipboard and I can refresh right before we start. It is okay to use a script. Okay, you can already have typed out the facts of the case for your hemolytic transfusion reaction. For your preview, you can just write boom, 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 like your bullet points. I want to talk about 3 things today. I want to talk about A, B, and C. Okay, first I want to start with A. You know, and we're going to spend 30 minutes unpacking A, B, and C. Let's start with A. And then you can write your objectives in there. And it could be objective 1 is your what was the last one? Closed loop communication and an interprofessional team. Objective 2 is treating a hemolytic transfusion reaction. And I may leave objective 3 blank in case I get something, somebody is just shares a whole lot in the reactions phase. And it's about like a particular piece of the science or a particular piece of communication or teamwork. And I say, you know what? I want to unpack that further. I'm going to add this to our conversation so we have time to discuss this together. Because if somebody's being vulnerable and sharing their feelings and their reactions with you in the beginning, and it needs to be unpacked, you need to unpack it. And so, but it's also okay to say, I'm going to add this to my list, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit so you can finish getting reactions from the group. And then summary, you can put down, thanks for participating in a great conversation today. I'd love to know a couple things you're taking into practice with you. You put your wording down there, not your simulation center director's wording, not the debriefer that you want to emulate. It has to be your wording. It has to be authentic. I have my debriefing mentor at my institution. I spent a solid 2 years trying to be her. I'm not. And when I gave that up, because this is how it works for me. And so I'm hoping you guys have gotten that out of this conversation. Yes, we talked about evidence-based things we can do, use a framework, talked about body language, we talked about AI, we talked about plus delta. There are evidence-based things we can do. But out of that, you need to do what works for you and use the wording that works for you. So Crystal, if we could click on the bottom, UAB forms, again, just sharing resources with you guys. This is from our website. Erica is spot on. Erica just put the link in there. These are free and available to anyone. We are well resourced at UAB, very thankfully. And so we've had folks able, kind of had time to create different guides. And so, Crystal, we're not going to click on the ones that we talked about yesterday, but I do want you to see even our course planning forms, our scenario planning forms. Here's a debriefing guide that she was just hovering over. It's our version of what Cornell in Qatar put together, and that has all the details. And then we have the template and we have the debriefing guide for procedural. So a couple of you guys shared before using RCDP. We have our procedural debriefing guide in there, but then we have that debriefing template, which is blank. Okay, and you could fill it in. And so these we do have, you can see SimUAB in the little registered trademark. They are copyrighted. Nobody cares if you print. But you can take these ideas, make them your own. We want to do this. We don't want to do that. But I was at a conference in a whole other country, and we were talking about pre-briefing, and somebody said, there's this great video on pre-briefing on the internet, and they played it, and it was the one we have at UAB. And so we do have some resources, and I want to make sure you guys know they're out there. And then I think just the last slide is this. I'm asking for takeaways, I think. Yes, could you guys put some takeaways in the chat? I'd love to know a little feedback, what you guys got out of this, what worked for you. And then we can end, and I think we only have, we have maybe 7 minutes for questions. But if you guys could put in the chat some of your takeaways so I can kind of get an idea. Talk less. So I have a coworker. She's dean of our school. College of Arts and Sciences. And she uses the term waste, W-A-I-S-T. Why am I still talking? And it has nothing to do with debriefing. She just does that as a teacher. Waste. Why am I still talking? Be curious, focus on the why. Yes, 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 Beth, use your own style. Because circular questions are amazing. Advocacy inquiry is amazing. It's not if you can't use it. Hopefully you work toward improving as a debriefer and you try these different things, but you don't need to keep going in nervous, feeling like a failure. I can't do it. And then it's just not a good conversation. The focus is on a conversation and reflection. Yeah, be flexible, and it's okay. There's no one way. I even made a sign because I say this phrase all the time. It depends. There's no one way to do it. There is no one way to do it. Yeah, you can't determine someone else's safe space. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, guys. So in our last 5 minutes, we can put questions in the chat, or I don't know, am I allowed to say we could unmute or raise hand? I don't know, Crystal. I'm bucking the system. I'm happy to answer questions any way you want to ask them.
Yeah, Eric, if anybody wants to unmute, you can raise your hand and we'd be happy to do that. I don't know, Erica, have we got other questions during the presentation?
Yes, so we did have 2 questions during the presentation, so hopefully I can do a great job of referencing them during the presentation, but those that ask, please jump in. So Jeannie had asked, when you were in the plus delta section of the presentation, what did you mean by only the learner can identify performance gaps?
They need to tell you, so we could say, oh, that didn't go right. We can absolutely see something didn't go right, but only the learner can tell us why it happened. So like the chest compression example, guys doing chest compressions 80 a minute, that's too slow, but we don't know why. So sorry if I was confusing there. We can see performance gaps, but we don't know why they happened. And so we need to ask our learners to reflect on why they made that choice, so that we can identify that specific learning gap, and then we can work to close it. It's often best if you can get the learners to close it, but sometimes there is just a coaching situation. If it is a pure knowledge deficiency, that is a coaching opportunity. If Michael said, oh, I thought it was 80 to 100 compressions per minute, or I went blank, it was stressful, I completely forgot how fast I was supposed to do compressions, that's a quick coaching moment. Yep, 100 to 120. You can use Baby Shark or Staying Alive. And so when it's a pure knowledge deficit, that's a coaching opportunity. So I hope I cleared that up.
And then Ram had asked during the scripted part of the presentation, if the scripting was what's considered debriefing points. Is that what you mean by debriefing script?
I guess so. I mean, by debriefing points, if that's what you want to discuss, I think the script is this bigger picture. How is this, let's say 30-minute conversation going to go? We're going to have reactions. We're going to have description. We're going to have an understanding phase. The debriefing points sound like they'd fit in the analysis understanding section, kind of those objectives. That's kind of what I'm feeling. If I didn't answer that correctly, please let me know.
So those were the only 2 questions in the chat. Does anybody else want to hop on and ask questions? I know we only have about 2 minutes left, but overall, thank you so much, Michelle, for being with us today. Cool. Great presentation.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And if there's anything I said that was like, what is that lady talking about? Email me. Or if you're like, hey, I might need to know more about this, email me too. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I want everybody to be able to sit down in debriefing and feel like, whoo, let all this structure and I have to do it this way, just let it go. It has to be something that's authentic to you. My Twitter handle, the little phrase, the little summary underneath my Twitter is authenticity and vulnerability are superpowers. They are more powerful than most things. Vulnerability and authenticity. Cool.
This has been great. Yes, thank you so much. I think, it's in the last minute, I guess I will ask a question. Do you continuously give feedback to other debriefers at UAB? And are you doing that on a certain basis? And what tool are you using to get that feedback?
So we, yes, we do debriefing feedback. We have a formal program actually, and I don't lead it. We have one of our other debriefers lead it. We have made our own tool. So there's the Dash, there's the OSAD. But we have pulled actually our debriefing feedback form might be on that website. I'm probably, if not, I'm sure I can mail it out. We have all of our debriefers receive formal feedback. Maybe it's not on there. Debriefing. No, Crystal, if you want, I can send that to you. It's kind of a modified dash. It's
Okay.
just what our people need and what was working for us. We have all of our debriefers do formal debriefing feedback at least once a year. We review a recording and give them feedback. But we also emphasize a lot on creating a culture of feedback so that when I'm debriefing, like I have one content expert in mind, he's phenomenal physician. He's not a very good debriefer, but he works so hard at it. And so then there's also, how do you give 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes, 30 seconds of debriefing feedback after a co-debriefing session. And so I think we have both formal and informal feedback. And we make sure and work with our folks on how to give that informal feedback. So it's not like, ugh, every time I debrief with Michelle, she points out what I need to change,
Right.
you know?
I like it. I like it a lot. Well, even for people that have formal training or do debriefing a lot, there's never enough practice. And so I love hearing, other viewpoints on my own debriefing or even getting a chance to practice with other experts. So I think that's great to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I get debriefing feedback once a year too.
And
And they can always request it more frequently. We just require it once a year.
it's great. Exemplary. We're striving to get there. Yeah. Any other questions? Sorry, go ahead.
Saying it so succinctly makes us sound like we're just perfect. Oh, it's not. There are some people we can't chase down, or we forgot to do a recording and they only debrief twice a year. And so it's not perfect, but it works well.
Very much. Very interested in your form. I can email you back.
Okay.
Any other questions or anybody want to unmute? I know we are over time. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown.
Awesome.
It's phenomenal. We
Yeah.
very much appreciate your time this morning. We will make sure that we notify everyone when the recording is ready and on YouTube, in case any of your cohorts or your colleagues were unable to join. So thank you everyone for a very successful quarterly session.
Awesome. Thank you guys. You guys have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.